So I know that the title of this video says that it's going to be about the new Spider-Man show, but before I get to that, I want to talk about Disney XD's recent reboot of DuckTales. This is a nearly perfect example of how to bring back a cartoon from the ground up. The original DuckTales, while great for its time, is very simple compared to the cartoons we have today. But this new series captures the original's adventurous spirit while updating the characters, animation, and theme song, but it still retains every part of what made them special in the first place. I'm very happy with what I've seen of this reboot so far, and I'm excited to watch more. But this video isn't about the DuckTales reboot. That's not what I want to talk about today. No.
I want Spider-Man!
I'm kind of a casual Spider-Man fan. I haven't read any of the comics, but I know all the basics about the characters and storylines. I'm also a fan of most of the movies. Homecoming had a basic story, but was very fun to watch, and the original Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies are all good, despite being covered in a very thick layer of cheesiness.
He stole that guy's pizza!
Even though I'm a fan of the character, and I'm a big fan of cartoons, if you couldn't already tell, I haven't really seen any of the Spider-Man cartoons outside of a few episodes of the 90s animated series ages ago. But apparently Disney had my back, because they've just launched a new Spider-Man animated series, only 7 months after the previous one ended, simply titled Spider-Man, or Marvel Spider-Man if you don't feel like calling it Spider-Man 2017. I'm really starting to hate this common trend of reboots that share the same names as the originals, since now you have to differentiate each property using the year that it came out in. Come to think of it, that's actually the only problem I have with the DuckTales reboot so far. At first I wondered why the creators decided to give their show such a boring and uncreative name, but after watching this show, that name has begun to make a lot of sense. The first question that I have with any new take on a beloved property is, what's the twist? In other words, what does this incarnation of Spider-Man do differently compared to the others? The answer is, hardly much at all. We have the typical Spidey origin story, where Peter Parker is an average kid that no one understands until he gets bitten by a radioactive spider and his life gets flipped upside down. Check it out, I flipped the image on screen upside down to correspond with when I said upside down. I'm like the best editor in the world. Now Peter has to handle transferring to Horizon High, a school for geniuses, keeping his identity a secret from his friends and family, and getting used to his new great power and the great responsibilities that come with it. I find the premise for this show to be rather boring. There isn't any concept here that wasn't done better in another piece of Spider-Man media, and everything is executed in a pretty generic way. The origin is almost exactly like how it was in the 2002 movie, and moments like Peter using his new powers to wrestle, and him letting the robber who would murder Uncle Ben get away are ripped from the movie beat by beat. Though the movie handles the murder of Uncle Ben a million times better than this series does, as his introduction and death are within 5 minutes of each other, and the tone suddenly switches from fairly lighthearted to super dramatic in a heartbeat. Seeing Peter struggle with his superpowers and figure out the best ways to use them is a huge part of his story and character, but within 2 episodes he's got everything figured out. He doesn't always win every battle, and his superhero life is slowly taking over his teenage life, but he doesn't have to deal with any moral dilemmas or have his powers hurt his life in a significant way. The show focuses more on Peter's day-to-day adventures at school and fighting the occasional bad guy. This is what draws most viewers into the Spider-Man series, but cutting out most of Peter's serious struggles gets rid of a lot of the character's depth. They also answer questions that fans have pondered for ages, like what happened to Bernie Sanders after he lost the election in the Marvel Universe? Apparently, he became Harry Osborn's chauffeur.
It may be a new school, Bernie, but it's the same old routine.
Another one of my favorite elements in the Spider-Man series is Peter trying to keep his identity a secret. That's a source of drama I've always been invested in, sometimes a little too invested in. Like in some of the movies, there's scenes where Peter is unmasked while standing on top of a building, and someone could easily see him if they just turned around or looked up. In my head, I'm always yelling, "What are you doing? Put your mask on!" But in this show, the secret identity thing isn't taken seriously at all. Peter takes seconds to change in and out of his costume, and nearly no one questions how similar he looks and sounds to Peter, or how he's able to be invested in the problems at Horizon High despite not being a student there. Usually, Peter changing into Spider-Man is just a joke here, which completely squanders what could be a great source of drama. Because of his lack of depth in all areas, this Spider-Man is really boring to me, and most of the time, everything he says just comes off as annoying too. Peter is almost always saying something nerdy or science related, because the writers really want you to know that he's a nerd who loves science. This in turn downgrades his origin story, since he uses the steps of the scientific method to understand his powers. This causes the shorts that form the series' origin episode to be formulaic and have very little stakes, which once again is disappointing considering how interesting the origin of this character has been before. Also, whenever Peter's Spider-Man, he never shuts up. I know that Spider-Man is known for his one-liners during fights, but 95% of what he says isn't even funny.
Much better! It's quite a scream you got there! Ever think of auditioning for... So you know how to scream?
But even though the title character doesn't make much of an impression on me, maybe some of the supporting characters can. Just about every single one of these characters can be summed up in 2 words, like Harry is the best friend, Gwen Stacy is the snarky girl, Aunt May is the caring elder, Norman Osborn is the evil dad, Spencer Smythe is also the evil dad, but they really mix things up with Raymond Warren, who's an evil uncle. Didn't see that one coming, did ya? Most of these characters are only really here because they're recognizable Spider-Man characters, and almost all of them don't have any unique character traits or even unique designs. A lot of the adults in particular don't have any diverse features, and because of that I sometimes got them mixed up with each other. The show mostly uses the same body types for all of its characters, with hair and clothing being the only thing to distinguish them, and that leads to a lot of super lazy character designs. I guess it's kind of early to judge a lot of these characters completely, since as I'm making this video, the show only has a couple of episodes to its name, and I can tell that the creators have plans for most of the characters. I actually find this to be a problem. Literally every single named character in the show is an established Marvel character, and this annoys me because I can automatically tell how the character may be used later in the show. Peter's friend Miles and Anya are the second Spider-Man in the Ultimate Universe and Spider-Girl, Harry or his father is going to be the Green Goblin, and Peter's teacher Otto Octavius is going to be Dr. Octopus. The show does this to the point that I'm starting to find it obnoxious. I'd rather have the creators make a new character rather than constantly repurpose old ones, even if they are going to have a payoff with some of them. Just look at Ned from Spider-Man Homecoming. Despite basically being a new character, he was one of the most likable and hilarious people in the movie. The makers behind that film took a risk with him, and it paid off, but I guess the team behind this show just doesn't want to try anything new. This series might not even be able to pay off all the characters it sets up, especially if you consider something about the show that I'll mention later in this review, and I really don't want to have the series end, and Otto Octavius is still a short, wormy teacher instead of one of the coolest villains in the franchise like he really should be. Speaking of villains, most of them are pretty pathetic. They all get a few minutes of screen time each, and their origin stories are either never explained or explained very briefly. A lot of Spider-Man's villains have a somewhat relatable backstory or some kind of connection to Peter, so having most of them show up without any formal introduction not only alienates new viewers, but also makes the characters weaker in general. A lot of the villains have lame abilities too. The Vulture has the ability to create really loud and annoying screams, and has this huge orange headpiece covering his whole face. How is he even supposed to see through it? The characters Shocker and Clash are just 2 kids with technology who believe that the best way to stop a friend from turning against you is to turn against them even more. Also, Shocker is voiced by Cameron Boyce, who was the really annoying boy on Jesse. This isn't actually his first appearance in a Spider-Man show, since Jesse actually had a crossover episode with Ultimate Spider-Man. Yes, this really happened. Spider-Man has one of, if not the best rogues gallery in comics, so to see many of the villains either be boring or leave such a little impression on me is very disappointing. But I've saved the best for last. Let's talk about the animation. This may be one of the worst looking American cartoons in years. Not only does the art style look super generic and bland, but there's a lot of choppy animation, even in simple movements and walk cycles. The first episode has a slow motion shot, but instead of doing something like adding more frames to the animation, the animators just slowed the shot down, which doesn't look good at all. The backgrounds look like rough drafts and are way too simple to be considered passable. The world is also littered with CGI objects, and that technology is used to animate every single car and vehicle. These objects blend in with the rest of the environment worse than the effects in Spider-Man 1 did, and a lot of them aren't textured well either. There's also next to no shading on any of the characters, which makes scenes taking place in the night or during special weather look unfinished. There's also a couple of moments where continuity between shots is non-existent. Spidey teleports over to the Vulture in this scene, and here he becomes free of his own webbing completely off screen. I guess Spider-Man was a magician all along. Boy, I hope I can get him to perform at my next birthday party. This continuity error removes a lot of tension from Spidey's encounter with the Vulture, though, like all of the fights on this show, there wasn't much tension to begin with. I was never concerned that the characters were really in danger. A lot of the action scenes were kind of basic as well, and I sometimes felt like I was watching two robots fight each other. Just one of the robots is super angry, and the other one doesn't know when to shut up. Many of the action sequences don't have any interesting set pieces or take advantage of their environments for much besides a gag or two, and could mostly be the same if they took place in a big white room with lots of walls. I believe that the writers may have kind of known how mediocre their fights were, since the show goes out of its way to artificially create drama. A lot of episodes have cliffhangers before commercial breaks, and they come off as pointless, since most of the series audience is going to watch the show online or on demand without any interruption. Plus, the intro to the show is too short to hold any tension to begin with. It's just a 15-second title card, and it is extremely underwhelming. I wouldn't be complaining if the intro was actually entertaining and exciting, but this feels like something that was put together at the last minute. The background music could be something that really adds to the atmosphere and tension, but it's barely even noteworthy. A lot of the score is very orchestral-like, which is a style that I suppose fits Spider-Man, but it doesn't create a score that you'll remember for a long time. This is a problem that many modern superhero properties have, especially ones in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but it's one that can be easily avoided when the composer goes the extra mile to create music that is more stylized and unique than what you would normally hear. You probably can't sing the theme of Thor off the top of your head, but you can probably sing Wonder Woman's theme, and that's because it's unlike anything else in Batman v Superman's soundtrack. I suppose the composer for this series did create some unique and memorable music in a few places, but it's unique and memorable for all the wrong reasons. Like, why is pan flute music associated with the jackal? If you looked at this character and thought that the pan flute would be the instrument best suited to him, then I don't think we were looking at the same character. To wrap this up, Disney's Marvel's Spider-Man 2017 is one of the laziest cartoons I've ever seen. It doesn't do anything new or interesting with its cast, its animation, its action, its atmosphere, or even its Spider-Man. I expect so much more from Disney XD. It's produced a lot of fantastic cartoons recently, and even when they aren't super fantastic, they're at least really creative or fun to look at. But this Spider-Man show doesn't have anything to offer that wasn't done better somewhere else, and I give it a score of 3 out of 10. If you want a Spider-Man show that does everything this series does, but a million times better, then just watch this. If you want a Spider-Man show that does everything this series does, but a million times better, then just watch The Spectacular Spider-Man. Compared to this new series, Spectacular has great action, villains that are actually threatening and have well thought out backstories, stylized animation and music, and characters and storylines that I really care about. It ended way too soon due to Disney getting the Spider-Man TV rights. Only after 26 of the planned 65 episodes were produced. But if the new series continues to get the abysmal ratings that it has now, then it probably won't last long either. I'm currently watching through Spectacular now, and even though I'm not a big action cartoon fan, I'm hooked and love just about all that I've seen. If you want a good example of how much better this show is compared to the new series, here's how both approach a scene where Spider-Man has to throw a bomb in the right place so it doesn't hurt anyone. The Spider-Man from the new series does this complicated math formula to figure out the right thing to do, because the show really wants you to remember that he's a nerd who loves science. You want to know what the Spectacular Spider-Man does? He just throws the bomb. How did they manage to make this moment so exciting and not super boring and pointless? It seems like the new Spider-Man series just really wants to be Spectacular Spider-Man. The setup and many plot points are very similar, and this follows the trend of this reboot, putting as little effort and creativity into everything that it does. Now I understand why this series wasn't given as much advertising as the DuckTales reboot, or why it wasn't given a cool name like The Amazing or The Spectacular Spider-Man, and that's because it doesn't deserve it. Next time Spider-Man gets another cartoon, I hope that Marvel tries to do something entirely new that we've never seen before, or at the very least, give Bernie Sanders his own spin-off, detailing his various chauffeur adventures. I'm Nintendo, and I've got a lot of great videos coming up later in the fall, some of which I'll give an update on next week. And to set a tone of excitement for what's to come, here's some pan flute music.